Hello guys and gals, Buffalo here. Welcome back to the range. Let me start this video by saying that I have no ties to either Ruger or Smith and Wesson. To them, I'm just a customer. If you've come to realize that you need or you just want a small lightweight revolver chambered with .22 long rifle and you're looking at either one of these two, well, you can't really go wrong. They're both great revolvers. And in today's video, I'm just going to show them side by side and point out some of their similarities and differences. Let's get started. Both of these revolvers are clear. You can see I've got them loaded up with snap caps. I don't even have any live ammunition on the table with me today. They're both double action, single action revolvers, meaning they can be fired by simply pulling the trigger, letting the trigger do all the work of cocking the hammer and releasing the hammer. That's your double action. Or you can cock them and shoot them in single action. Now the trigger simply has the job of dropping the hammer, a single action. And that lightens the trigger up a lot. And for most people, they find it easier to hit their target in single action. It's easier to keep their sights lined. You don't have that long trigger pull to disrupt your sight picture. And having that single action option is handy on a kit gun. And I consider both of these kit guns, even though Smith and Wesson uses the name kit gun on theirs, the Ruger is every bit as much of a kit gun as the Smith and Wesson. And with a kit gun, you may want to use these to put a rabbit or squirrel in the pot. And having that single action capability will make it easier to do that. They're both chambered for 8 rounds of .22 long rifle. They both have 3-inch barrels, and they're pretty close to the same size. The Ruger is slightly larger and bulkier than the Smith and Wesson, but they're pretty close. I really don't think there's anything that one can do that the other cannot. That being said, they do have their differences. The Smith & Wesson has an aluminum alloy frame, cylinder, and barrel shroud. It does have a stainless steel inner barrel, and of course hardened steel parts where needed for the fire control components. The Ruger also has an aluminum alloy frame and outer barrel with a stainless steel inner barrel. But in contrast to the Smith & Wesson, the Ruger has a stainless steel cylinder, and you can see how deeply fluted that cylinder is just to remove some weight. It also features a polymer fire control housing. So everything you're looking at from the front of the trigger guard along this line and then up here, all this from there back, including the grip peg, is polymer. So we've got two different ways of going about keeping the weight down. And both are very lightweight revolvers. The empty Ruger comes in on my scale at 17.3 ounces. Now, I don't think anyone would argue that that is not a lightweight revolver. The Smith & Wesson, same condition, unloaded, comes in at 11.7 ounces. So that's an extremely lightweight revolver. Quite a bit lighter than even the lightweight LCRx. So if weight is your biggest concern and you're choosing between these two, obviously the Smith & Wesson is quite a bit lighter. The Ruger uses a push button style cylinder release. Just simply press the button, roll the cylinder out. And the Smith & Wesson, of course, uses that thumb piece that you push forward. So just push that forward, open your cylinder up. The ejector rods are about the same length on both of these, with the LCRx being fully shrouded while the Smith & Wesson is not. The grips on both of these are really nice. I like both of them. I can get a full 3 fingers on both grips. The Ruger uses that Hogue Tamer grip. It's a little chunkier, thicker, fatter grip than what Smith & Wesson uses, but both are nice. One thing I will say about the Ruger, where it has that large trigger guard, which is an advantage if you shoot with gloves a lot, it has a much larger trigger guard than the Smith & Wesson, so you can get a gloved finger in there much easier. But because of that and the way this grip interfaces with the rear of that trigger guard, I can't get my middle finger up behind my trigger finger the way I do on the Smith and Wesson. And that makes for the Smith and Wesson having a much lower bore axis than the Ruger. See how high that Ruger looks like it sits in my hand? That's because I can't get my middle finger up in behind my trigger finger. I can't choke up on the grip. So that's something to consider. And now I know there's aftermarket grips available. You can change things around and make things how you want, but I'm just comparing them as they shipped. Same thing with the sights. I'm just comparing what they put on at the factory. The Ruger has a ramped front with a white stripe. It is pinned in place. Has a square notch in the rear that is fully adjustable, so you can adjust that sight to your favorite 22 ammo. We all know different brands of 22 ammo have different points of impact sometimes, and even the same brand lot to lot. So it's nice to have that fully adjustable sight. And the Smith and Wesson has that too. It has a fully adjustable rear sight, but it's a V-notch. And it has a high-vis fiber optic up front pinned in place. I do not like the V-notch. I'm going to interject some personal opinion here again. Not my favorite style of sight to shoot. That large high-vis sight, I never can be consistent resting that or aligning that into that V-notch. It just doesn't seem to fit no matter what way I try to look at it. And it makes smaller targets very difficult to hit. Where with the Ruger, that more traditional sight setup, it's just, for me, I'm just talking for me here, some people might prefer these sights. I way more prefer the Ruger. And on the older 317s, they actually had that style of sight on here, but at some point they went to the high vis and the V-notch. And just me talking here, I wish they hadn't. So let's take a look at the triggers here. I know some of you guys really want to see the trigger comparison. Ruger really brags on the trigger on the LCR line. They say it has a friction reducing cam and a non-stacking smooth pull. And it is a decent trigger. But in my opinion, the Smith and Wesson trigger beats it. It just feels a little smoother, a little cleaner, a little lighter on the pull weight. I do have a trigger pull scale here. We'll test that out. I don't think I've ever checked the double action pull on the LCRx. My previous trigger scale wouldn't go high enough to test it. It would only go to 12 pounds. Let's test it here. I do have snap caps. I think I mentioned that earlier in the video. In both of these revolvers, so we are good to go. When you're testing a double action trigger pull, make sure you aren't touching the cylinder or that'll mess up your reading. Put this on peak. This little trigger scale's just been great. 14.1 pounds. And that has, the trigger on this has lightened up considerably since I've owned it, and I've put a lot of rounds through it. And it's still 14.1 pounds. Let's check the Smith and Wesson. 12.3 pounds. So both double action pulls are heavy, with the LCRx being heavier. And typically your rimfire double action revolvers are heavier than your center fire. They need more force to be sure to fire that rimfire cartridge reliably. So let's try single action. And notice something here. The Ruger does have a wider surface for your thumb, and that is helpful. It gives you a little more confidence when you're cocking or decocking the revolver. £5.5 pounds. And with the Smith and Wesson, 3.1 pounds. Both these revolvers have built-in mechanisms to make them drop safe. The Ruger uses a transfer bar system. When the trigger is pulled, a transfer bar moves up so that the hammer can contact the transfer bar which transfers that energy to the frame-mounted firing pin, which then fires the cartridge. The Smith and Wesson also has a built-in drop-safe mechanism, but it works in the opposite way. It has a hammer block. When the trigger is pulled, it moves the hammer block down out of the way of the hammer so that the hammer can make contact with the frame-mounted firing pin and fire the cartridge. The Smith and Wesson also has this keyhole right here. It actually comes with a key when you buy it new, and you can lock the revolver up when not in use. This internal lock is universally disliked. No one I know likes having that on their revolver. I just ignore it. I've never put a key into that keyhole. But if that's something that you would do, that you think you would use, is a built-in lock, the Smith and Wesson has it, the Ruger does not. Personally, I'm glad to see Smith and Wesson kind of moving away from the internal locks this year. Both of these revolvers are popular enough that you won't have any problems finding holsters. I mean, the Smith and Wesson is a J-frame. You're not going to have any problems there. And the Ruger has a huge following as well. I found both of these holsters on Amazon. I'll provide a link in the description if I can remember. You can see they are paddle style holsters. They've got the notches that clip in behind your belt. Just simple little outside the waistband leather holsters with the Kydex or plastic paddle. These are another good way to show the size difference of these revolvers as well. If I try to put the Smith and Wesson in the LCRx holster, it'll fit, but it's a little sloppy. If I try to put the LCRx, on the other hand, into the J-frame holster, it's a no-go. That large trigger guard just won't let it in there. Now, we can't do a comparison video without talking about cost of the revolvers. That's something that's hard for me because YouTube frowns on that. I've been dinged more than once for talking about price points, so I'm just going to say it like this. If you look around, you'll likely see this one going for $100 to $150 less than this one. If you're looking at one of these revolvers, you should be looking at the other. And what I mean by that is, even if you've got your mind made up, if you haven't handled both of these revolvers, get to a shop somewhere where you can get your hands on both of them, because they feel very different. They're similar in a lot of ways, but they feel very different in the hand. And to me, that's the most important aspect. How that gun handles to you, what you prefer, that's going to have the biggest impact on how well you shoot it and how confident you are with it. Alright, so that concludes my video comparison of the Ruger LCRx 22 and the Smith and Wesson 317 kit gun. I hope someone finds it useful. I know I didn't cover every little thing, but I did try to give a decent summary of the things I would want to know if I were looking to spend my hard-earned money on one of these revolvers. And I do have full-length video reviews of each of these revolvers if you want to check that out and learn more. Now, normally, this is a part of the video where I remind you guys that freedom is the greater good, and it is. But I'm going to end today's video a little differently. This is the first long-form video that I've cobbled together since my dad passed away. And Dad really loved my videos. He enjoyed showing them to his friends. If I went very long without posting a video, Dad would ask me, "Why ain't you been making any movies?" So I know he would want me to keep going. So Dad, I love you. I miss you. This video is dedicated to you.